Hi, I'm Joe Nolan. I'm a PhD candidate at Griffith University and I'm a research scholar with the Queensland Academy of Sports Research Unit Spike. Today I'll be presenting some initial findings from a recently conducted focus group study where we investigated what the internal stakeholders of Queensland sport organisations value in their relationships and interactions with one another. So what do internal stakeholders really value in their relationships? This is the question that we set out to answer. But before I get into that, it's important to first explain why stakeholder relationships are so important. Sport organisations operate in a dynamic and complex environment, epitomised by an extensive list of varied stakeholder groups. These individuals represent the foundation upon which sport is built and are arguably a sport's most valuable asset. Relationship quality has been previously shown to have a strong impact on the satisfaction, performance, and retention of individuals involved in sport, and therefore increasing stakeholder ties is crucial. Despite this, research attempting to investigate overall relationship quality across a number of groups remains scarce, and there are calls from the literature for future research to explore a wider array of interactions from multiple stakeholder perspectives. The findings of a systematic literature review which we undertook earlier this year further confirmed these gaps. We reviewed 63 peer-reviewed papers published on the topic of relationship quality in sport and found that athletes were by far the most common stakeholder examined, featuring in 42 of the 63 papers. The investigation of other internal stakeholder relationships, such as those experienced by managers, clubs, and officials, was scarce. In addition to this, 75% of papers only investigated one relationship, and 84% of these papers examined that relationship from only one perspective. Now, sports stakeholder relationships are multidimensional and multidirectional, and therefore the investigation of these relationships in isolation is not representative of the broader network in which sport operates. This brings us to our research aim, which was to identify the most significant elements of relationship quality across a number of key stakeholder groups. The research method selected to help us achieve this aim was online qualitative focus group interviews. Now, originally these interviews were going to be face-to-face, however, due to the social distancing measures that were in place at the time of the interviews, the protocol had to be changed. This actually provided us with a fantastic opportunity to reach individuals all across the state of Queensland, which would not have been possible otherwise. We employed purposive sampling to target 5 key groups, and these were athletes, coaches, officials, club administrators, as well as the managers of state sport organisations. The interviews themselves were semi-structured and utilised probing questions, such as, what are the most important elements of your relationship with your club? Or, what makes a strong relationship between yourself and the officials in your sport? Each of the 5 groups had 2 corresponding interviews where participants were divided based on whether they were involved in a team sport or an individual sport. This resulted in a total of 54 participants spread across 10 different focus group interviews. And this included 16 managers from state sport organisations, 9 athletes, 6 coaches, 13 officials, and 10 club administrators. Now, when looking at a breakdown, there were slightly more participants representing individual sports when compared to team sports, and there were more men that took part in the group interviews than women. All in all, a total of 22 different sports were represented by the 54 participants, with track and field, football, and tennis being the most prominent of these. Upon completion of the focus group interviews, thematic analysis was utilised to systematically code the qualitative data. And as a result of this process, key relationship elements emerged through identification of patterns and themes. Now, for the purpose of this presentation, I will only be focusing on the findings that directly relate to the major theme of communication, which consistently came across in all 10 of the group interviews. In both the interviews conducted with state sport organisation management, communication was highlighted a number of times as being one of the most important elements of their relationships with different stakeholders. The managers believed that having consistent two-way communication and an open dialogue with stakeholders was a key part of developing stronger connections with athletes, coaches, and clubs. The importance of strong relationships and clear communication with clubs and coaches was pointed out as being really significant, as these 2 groups are the ones who are often directly responsible for disseminating information down to their athletes. So having a consistent message here was key. The importance of listening to feedback and transparency in communication was also discussed. And in addition to these elements, the managers specifically pointed out that a key part of their communication in regard to officials was being focused on the elements of recognition and respect, which they believe were particularly important to this group. These factors were summarized well by the National Talent Pathways Manager of one sport, who stated that people just want to be heard and they want to make sure that they've been spoken to honestly and it's genuine. Now, unlike the consistent communication elements discussed by management, athletes valued a number of varied things when it came to their communication with other groups. When it came to their training partners and team members, humor, trust, and encouragement were important factors. When it came to their coaches, they valued when their coach provided clear expectations and direction. And when it came to their interactions with officials, this centered around respectful and appropriate communication. Similar to the key elements discussed by managers, athletes also valued transparency and two-way communication in their relationships with both their club and the state sport organisation. And one athlete stated that communication was basically the most important part of any relationship. Now, when going on to the coaches, they also valued the same things from their club and SSO as the athletes did. But in addition, they also discussed the importance of alignment and the clarity of communication with these groups. When coaches thought about their relationships with one another, they valued open communication that allowed them to find common ground. Strong relationships with athletes and officials mainly revolved around respectful communication, but also encouragement and trust when it came to the relationships that they had with the athletes they were coaching. According to one head coach in athletics, communication is the key for everything, whether it's with your athletes, the state organisation, or other clubs. Now, moving on to the officials. The number one relationship element discussed by officials was respect. This was found to be important in their communication and interactions with athletes, coaches, and also among themselves. Unlike their relationship with coaches, where the significance of having a point of separation was discussed, effective communication with athletes and other officials was actually built through developing a rapport and subsequently being able to tailor that communication to each individual. The verbal acknowledgement and appreciation they received from clubs was also extremely valuable to them. And one official said that you've got to have that communication going with them all the time. Now, finally, when looking at the club administrators, they too saw the important role that recognition played in their communication with officials, but they also valued respect and openness. These factors were also significant in their other relationships, and when it came to the club's communication with athletes and coaches, their main focus was on keeping them informed and being transparent. The goal in their communication with other clubs was to find common ground and to seek harmony, and this was emphasized by one administrator who said that you've got to be on speaking terms. You have to be able to talk to each other. Once again, having an open dialogue was the key factor in having a strong relationship with the state sport organisation. So what's the significance of these findings? Well, firstly, on a practical level, this study has highlighted the critical role that communication plays in developing strong stakeholder relationships within the sport context. The findings showcase that stakeholders value similar elements in their communication with their state sport organisation. They want there to be a consistent, two-way, open dialogue where the SSO is transparent and genuine. Now, on the flip side, the communication elements valued in relationships between stakeholders does vary, and therefore, if management are seeking to further facilitate and enhance these internal sport connections, which are vital for the future of their sport, they need to have a tailored approach. On a theoretical level, this research has addressed a number of calls from the literature to explore multiple relationships from multiple perspectives. In addition to this, it has filled a substantial knowledge gap in regard to the relationships of several key stakeholders, such as officials or club administrators, which, to this point, have been previously under-researched and underrepresented within the literature. And finally, it is believed that through identifying key relationship elements, this research has helped lay the foundation for future quantitative examination of stakeholder relationships in sport. So, going back to my initial question, what do sport stakeholders really value in their relationships? Based on our findings, communication is a massive part of it, but the way you communicate to different groups and the motivation behind that communication, that's what's really important. Thank you.